This is Sean Yoes of the Real News Network, and I'm having a conversation with Walter Lomax. He's director of the Maryland Restorative Justice Initiative. Walter, welcome.
Thanks for inviting me, Sean.
Thank you for taking time to speak with us. So why don't we explain, or have you explain, what the work you do for Maryland Restorative Justice Initiative?
Our organization was formally formed in 2007. It's called the Maryland Restorative Justice Initiative, and what we do is we advocate for sensible criminal justice policies, specifically for folk that are incarcerated, and in particular for folk who are serving parole-eligible life sentences and long-term incarceration. We are advocating to remove the politics away from this process.
So, in that work, you obviously have impacted the lives of many people returning back from prison, from being incarcerated, the returning population. Over the years, over the last 5 years, have you seen an increase in the returning population, or has it stayed basically the same?
Well, it's definitely been an increase, but specifically for this particular population that we advocate on behalf of, we've definitely seen an increase in this population. Specifically, well, we began advocating for this work more than 5 years ago. It really started in 1993 and began to take some type of shape in 1995, and then took, I guess, some progressive steps after 2006. And what happened was there was a traditional policy or a procedure that exists in the Maryland prison system where an individual serving these type of sentences would come into the system into maximum security, progress to medium security, minimum security, and work release and family leaves, and then eventually released on parole. And it's an extensive vetting process. This process took 15 to 20 years for folk were actually being released back into the community. Well, in 1995, that changed. These folk were no longer, first in 1993, they were no longer eligible for these programs, work release and family leave. And then in 1995, they weren't even to be considered for parole. A current governor at that time issued an edit that life means life and that he wouldn't consider releasing anyone on parole. And this is still exists for over 23 years at this point. But what happened along the way, while we were advocating for a change in that policy and a change in the procedure, specifically having legislation introduced, in 2012, a decision that was decided by the Maryland Court of Appeals called the Unger decision. And what that meant was that prior to 1980, anyone that was convicted by jury would be entitled to new trials because the jury instructions were erroneous. And so in 2013, some of these individuals began to be released. In fact, it was May 2013. And since May of 2013, we've had well over 150, I think my last count was about 155, of these individuals have been released back into the community.
Lay out some of the specific challenges that your clients, the people that you work with, face when they return, and how do you specifically help them make the adjustment coming back into our community?
Some of the challenges, the primary ones, is that they've been incarcerated 20, 30, 40, in some cases, years or more. And so this means that they didn't have access to the technology that exists today, as well as the changes socially and otherwise in society. And so their return back into society is sort of like a cultural shock. They come in, being in an environment where it's controlled for an extended period of time, and then having decisions, for the most part, made for you, being told where to go, when to go, and in some cases, how to go for an extended period of time, having all of your basic needs met, and then finally finding yourself into a situation where you have to do all of these things on your own. And once again, that's some of the specific challenges. What we've been able to do, which is unique for people that are returning to society. In fact, it was mentioned to us, we met with the complete body of the parole commissions, and they looked at what we have been doing for these folk that have been returning back into the community, and said that if this model existed for everyone, then probably no one would recidivate. And that is that prior to their release, a release plan is put together. And we have social workers and case managers that works with them once they're actually released back into the community. And there are a lot of challenges because some are younger and some are much older. Those who are much older that qualify for all of the existing programs, Social Security, SSI, and things of that particular nature. So they fall right within that, and they are entitled to. Well, not necessarily. In fact, we had one 70-year-old gentleman was working, and I asked him, he said he was looking for a job, and I was like, what the hell are you looking for a job for? He said, well, I don't have enough points. What you mean you don't have enough points? To draw Social Security. So he had been in prison all of these years, and when he wanted to apply for Social Security, he realized that he didn't have enough points. He had to work to get those points,
right,
just to get the benefits. But however, that's the exception and not necessarily the rule for folk who actually qualified. Most people are able to get those benefits, but we do have some younger clients that are unable to get those.
right,
And so this means that they have to get into the job market.
right.
And I'm hammering on this is because I'm watching this scenario play out with the Baltimore City Council about this minimum wage and as to why they can't agree on the $15 and even $15 is still like poverty level living, so to say. And I was thinking to myself as I'm watching this play out is to say that if you took any one of them and said, look, okay, you survived, you just live for a year on minimum wage and see how the hell that feels. And once you see that, then you'll realize that it's unconscionable to think that you can't pay folk that money. But getting back to my point is that, so what this means though, is that they're going, even when they get employment, they are basically at the minimum wage level starting off,
right,
and it's really not a livable wage. Now, if you take a situation where people that are incarcerated, specifically in Maryland prisons, for the most part are able to live at a poverty level living, standard of living, and if they have support from the outside, they can live above the poverty level. And so if you're returning an individual that had lived at that standard of living for an extended period of time, and then release them into an environment and you're asking them to reduce their level standard of living,
right,
that's challenging.
right. I want to transition into, obviously, the release of the Department of Justice Pattern of Practice Report was last week, and it was found that the Baltimore City Police Department had routinely violated the civil rights of mostly black, mostly poor people in the city over the period of decades, really. When as you have gone through the report, obviously most people who are familiar with the Baltimore City Police Department, the criminal justice system in Baltimore, realize that there weren't really any surprises necessarily, but still reading it in black and white, give me some of your thoughts of what you were thinking and what was going through your mind as you read what the DOJ was saying.
And I want to acknowledge up front is that I'm certainly not an authority on that. There are far more social advocacy organizations that have been really in the trenches moving this forward. But naturally, because not only have I observed a lot of these young men who is getting involved in the criminal justice system and how it began to impact their lives as a result of it, because once the arrest take place, it's still a part of their record.
Right.
And as a result of it, it kind of locks them out of certain avenues in the system. But one of the things that stuck out to me the most, and it's kind of like a history lesson too, because our family, we moved to Maryland in the mid-50s. And so it was still heavily segregated during that time. And even though it did not have the type of effects that it had on folk prior to that, because we had our own social environment that we existed in. And so we were impacted by it, but we did not feel the social stigma that it affected us at that level. But here's the point that sticks out the most to me. It's like if I hire a contractor to do a job, and it's union, and their workers mess up my bathroom, mess up my living room, mess up my house, and I complain about it, but because they're a union worker, whatever excuse that they use, the union has said, well, he's a union person, you can't fire him or whatever the case might be. And I'm saying, why the hell not? I mean, he did something wrong. So the Baltimore City Police is hired to do a specific job. They're public servants. We pay their salary. So if they do something wrong, there should be no Bill of Rights that you can't get rid of them.
Referring to the law enforcement officers'
Bill of Rights, exactly. And so they actually have the police commissioner and the mayor hostage. If somebody does wrong, your boss should be able to fire you. Simple as that. Now, I think that we should have unions because some people treat their workers really, really bad. So you need some type of protection. But if you are a worker and you do something wrong, then you should immediately be fired.
So ultimately, the power of the FOP is at the root of a lot of the issues that the Baltimore City Police Department and the community that it affects, that it's supposed to serve and protect, faces, really.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's not just the Baltimore Police Department because that culture is endemic across the spectrum. The Transit Authority exercise unbridled disrespect and disregard for the community. The Baltimore City Police Department, the Baltimore School Department. I watched a video a couple of months ago, and this officer was slapping this little kid around like a rag doll. And when he realized that he was caught on tape, they came up with this statement that, well, the child spit on him. And I'm saying, well, so the hell what? This is a child. And after he finished smacking him around, he kicked him. So how could you have somebody like this working around our kids? And how can you try to defend their actions? So when that type of behavior occurs, I think that there should be some type of system where those folk are immediately removed. And the training that should come into place, starting at the beginning, is that, look, you are a public servant. That's what you do. You're a public servant. You're not part of a force that comes in and executes your own law, not based on how you might be feeling that day. And if you don't do what you're required to do as a public servant, then it's time for you to find another line of work.
Let me ask you this, and we only have a couple of minutes left. When you speak of the systemic issues within the department, and within the city generally, but within the department, are you confident that the remedies can be applied in a short period of time as opposed to maybe over many years?
Yeah, I think that some things can be applied in a short period of time, and that is that the Fraternal Order Police actually come to the table and acknowledge that the system is broken and come to a consensus as to what we need to do in order to fix it.
That's a major if, though.
Well, naturally.
Walter Lomax is the director of the Maryland Restorative Justice Initiative. Walter, thank you for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.